Everybody goes crazy on set when they're waiting for even 5 seconds for audio for anything. People go crazy when they have to wait for audio to slate, but they're willing to wait for hours for lighting or camera, or even the actress that's locked herself in her trailer because her boyfriend broke up with her. Everybody's got tons of time for that, but nobody has time for audio not working, which is why you have to be doubly certain that all your gear is working. Your cables, your microphones, your recorders, everything. This chapter is dedicated to making sure that doesn't happen to you. It is an anthology of commonly recurring issues that happen on set and in post to gear. We hear it all the time. We're going to walk you through the most common issues and the easiest solutions to get your gear up and running. Look, things happen on set. I mean, even if you've double-checked and triple-checked, things happen. But we want to make sure you get up and running and back as fast as you can so people don't go crazy. Well, I mean, they're going to go crazy anyway. They're working in media production, for goodness sake. But at least they won't go crazy because of you. Let's roll. So in Gravity, what they've done is added basically the autonomic nervous system functions as a major part of this soundtrack to help you feel suspenseful. And then of course they turn all the audio off when she actually gets into this satellite module. And it's really, really scary when there's no audio going on. Very, very scary. So here's the heartbeat and breath as soundtrack. And you may find yourself holding your breath until she pulls that helmet off. Now as the sound effects come in, it gets a little more easy to be with her in this chamber. There's an awesome example of how to use sound effects to mess with people. It's fantastic as we loop back to the front again. There's all this sounds that are going on while she's trying to get in there, and they're obviously all muted because she's in a helmet, and again, like Kubrick did with 2001, it's out in space, so theoretically there's no sound out in space, but with acoustic coupling, you would hear it through your arms and things, but it would be really, really muted. It's just an awesome example of creativity with sound mixing. When you're choosing a sound recordist, don't do like I did once and ask the wrong question. The wrong question to ask is, hey, can you do this? Or, hey, do you know how to do this? That's the wrong question. The right question is, have you done this before? Oh my gosh. Or have you watched the Cinema Sound Education? Don't ask the wrong question.
Often hath it slept since, and wakes it now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely? From this time such I account thy love.
I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people that will be worn now in their newest gloss, not cast aside so soon.
Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself, and hath it slept since, and wakes it now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely? From this time such I account thy love. Art thou afeard to be the same in thine own act and valor as thou art in desire? Wouldst thou have that which thou esteemst the only?
If you're using an on-camera mic, make sure it's on. I know you're like, well, why wouldn't I do that? I did it on the Sound Advice tour in 2 different stops. We forgot to turn the camera mic on and we got nothing on the tour. Duh. Easy to do, easy to forget. Make sure your camera mic is on. If you're using a battery-powered microphone in a battery-powered mode, make sure those batteries are working. If you don't have Phantom Power Plus 48 and you're using those battery mics, make sure the batteries work. If you're using an RF transmitter receiver for a lab, whether it's analog or digital, it still has an issue with getting signal from that transmitter to the receiver. And if you have anything in between it, even if it's brick or metal, to say nothing of the fact there's another RF frequency happening that's near yours, you're going to have RF hits. And RF hits are really difficult to get rid of in post, no matter what software you have. So what are some solutions that you can do? Well, the first thing is get the transmitter closer to the receiver, or vice versa. Remember, that receiver usually, if you bought a good one, has some kind of XLR out. You don't have to have that receiver on your person or in your bag a long way away from where the actor is. Take the receiver, run a long XLR cable out to where the actor is, and then have that reception happen there. And you're like, well, but then why don't I just wire them? I don't know. Maybe your actor has to walk and they can't be wired, but at least they're free. Even if the receiver's 2 feet away from them, they can move around and you're going to get good, clear reception. Another thing you can do is change frequencies. And we're going to talk about frequencies and what to change them to in the wireless section. But, wireless is an imperfect science. Just like flying an airplane from here to Sydney. It's not smooth sailing all the way. Theoretically, it should be. Theoretically, we should have nice smooth air the whole time. But we don't. We get turbulence. Sometimes there's no explaining why RF doesn't work. But you're going to have to try all kinds of things to get it to make clean signal. The first thing to do, get that transmitter close to the receiver. If you're getting all kinds of other weird things, again, try those batteries. Change to different kinds of batteries. Not all battery makers have exactly the same voltage, and sometimes those receivers and transmitters are very susceptible depending on what you bought. So we had an interesting thing happen this morning as we prepped for a location shoot regarding the 25-foot microphone cables that I bought the other day, and we wanted to share it with you. So why is it important to have a tape measure on your audio cart? Certainly it's important to have a tape measure so that you can measure the distance from the glass of the camera to your actress so that you can pull the right focus, but that's not why it's on your audio cart. So imagine you knew that every one of the XLR cables on your cart were 25 feet long, and you saw between the camera and the actress, there were 2 of them, 50 feet. And you knew that audio travels through air at 1.1308 milliseconds per foot. Then you would be the only audio engineer anywhere probably in the world that would be putting on the audio log for the post people that her dialogue would reach the reference mic on the camera 1.4 frames late. And the editor can't fix it because his time base is in frames. It has to be fixed by the audio editor. And they're going to see that notation of 1.4 frames late because of a 50-foot differential and think you are a god and hire you again and again. So back to the tape measure. Why do we want a tape measure on our cart? Because each one of these cables is from a different manufacturer. See if you can figure out which one is 25 feet. Clothing rustle in lavalier microphones is a drag. Happens all the time. We hate it. Hopefully you can fix it with just switching to a boom microphone, but sometimes you can't. And that's when you need to use an Invisalab, you need to use a Rycoat, even moleskin, anything that you have on hand, even taking gaffer tape and messing with it so that it somehow covers it up to try to get that clothing from rustling on the microphone. Now, depending on where you have it, anatomy comes into play. One of the things you can do to solve this is cheat, and understanding what parts of the anatomy push against certain wardrobe is important. If you know that there is a space right here where the clothes are kind of a little bit looser than they are here, then it helps to know that if I put a microphone here, I'm going to tend to have less rustle. Also, if I put it here in that clavicle area, that clavicle space that's here, you're going to have a better chance of not having that rustle. Experiment where there are body cavities, not those body cavities, but the other body cavities around the epidermis and the skin and how the body hangs, especially how the wardrobe may hang. You may find that there's a loop in somebody's wardrobe, even in their sleeve, that creates enough of a space for that microphone to live inside a Rycoat or an Invisalab and get clear sound. Cable rustle. Sometimes you get that pull on the cable if the microphone has been set with a really tight cable, and you'll get that boom, dum, 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 or bumping along while the actor's moving. Not clothing rustle, but a bumping. Or sometimes the cable actually gets matted up on top of the mic, and you'll hear that weirdness, that kind of rustling of the cable. Now, the Invisilab has the ability to actually wrap the cable on its sides and layer it into the Invisilab so that doesn't happen. The Rycoat, a little bit more difficult, but you can loop it around. You can use gaffer tape and just tape the actual cable in a loop onto their person. Men don't like gaffer tape on their person. You might even try, well, for the hair reasons, pulling it off is what I mean. You can try taping it to the cable to the wardrobe itself if it's not going to hurt the wardrobe. Sometimes wardrobe is velour and it'll ruin it, so be very, very careful. But usually cable rustle is solved by taking a length of cable that's pulling or taut, making it loose, and securing it with gaffer tape or in some kind of other device like the Invisilab so that it's not being pulled on again and free from the diaphragm of the microphone. It's a drag when you're holding the boom pole and the cable's whacking against it, causing all kinds of weird noises. You can even have your shotgun mic on some kind of cool shock mount, but you're still going to get that cable noise. Two ways to solve it: the easy way and the awesome way. The easy way is those little cool plastic things that you threw away when you got your boom pole. Those weren't just little plastic things. Those are actual cable attachments. And they snap to the boom pole, and you take the cable and you just snap the cable so it's not flooping all around. That's a technical term, flooping. And then the awesome way is any kind of wireless boom pole transmitter. Sony makes one, Rode makes one. We used it for the beach scene. It's awesome. No cables, you're wireless, sounds great, and you're free. Shorts and cables are also a drag. Not shorts and cables, like you get that at Ross, but shorts in cables. Terrible. Things going in and out, crackling, noise. If you discover that it is in fact a short in a cable, don't try to fix it. Don't try to make the cable so it works. Get rid of it. Cables are your enemies, and you don't want to put up with that. Put another cable in. You did bring extra cables, right?
Yes!
When you get that super low rumbling in your recordings and you're like, whoa, man, what happened there? I was just recording a guy and there was no wind. What is that? Chances are you didn't put the high pass filter or the low cut, whichever way it is. It's the little thing that has a line and a little line that goes like this. Sometimes it's laser etched into the microphone or in your recorder or whatever. Make sure that's on. What that is it's removing frequencies roughly from 80 hertz and lower. It depends on your microphone, but generally frequencies that are low that the human voice can't possibly make. In fact, the human body can't possibly make. So there's no reason for us to want to have them recorded, those frequencies. So it cuts that off, and it allows the bandwidth of your recorder to be dedicated to human voice or the human action. So if you're getting a lot of low rumbly frequency, make sure that your low cut or your high pass filters are on. When you get that hum that you hear in your recording sometimes, it's really annoying. Of course, we can fix it with RX, de-hum. 60 hertz for those of us in North America, 50 hertz for those in Europe and Australia. It's awful, nasty, takes up bandwidth, really hard to get rid of. But here are some things that you can do to start looking for how to solve that and ideally fix it. Ensure that all your devices are plugged into the same power, the same AC power, the same AC power circuit, in fact. Sometimes, depending on where you are, the circuits give slightly different power, and the way ground and electricity works, it'll create some kind of weird loop and your audio will pick it up. Replace your cables. If you have any kind of degradation in the insulation on the inside of your cable, sometimes you can have a ground connected with one of your other cables that's in the little cable. You're going to have all kinds of ground problems. That ground cable should be completely separate. So just replace the cable. Cables are cheap, and they're your enemy. Replace your adapters. Adapters are cheap, man. They make them for pennies. I mean, unless you've got Mogami or some nonsense like that, in which case, probably not the problem. But replace them anyway if you've got a ground loop. Plug another one in. I've seen guys with 6 inches long of adapters. Well, that's never going to work. You're inviting trouble. Replace them, see if that's it. Whether you have a ground loop or not, it's always good practice to run your power cables and your audio cables at 90 degrees to each other. It creates the smallest impact point where possibly giant power high voltage cables can then somehow create a loop or a leap into your nice, happy, low voltage audio cables and give you a big brrr at your mixing desk or wherever you're recording it. So as best you can, try not to run parallel power and audio cables, especially if they're unshielded cables. You're looking for doom. Last, but certainly not something you have to end with trying, is a ground lifter, especially for XLR cables in particular. What it does is it takes the ground cable and literally disconnects it or reconnects it depending on how you're running it. That sometimes has the electrical sound that you're experiencing miss your audio and go somewhere else. Find a better way to ground. I'm not going to get into electricity. I don't even know how it works. It's just amazing. Thank you, Mr. Edison. But if you use a ground lifter, that usually solves it if nothing else will. Now, when you're getting a massive amount of volume or not enough volume, obviously it can be a trim issue, but sometimes it's just a simple switch that we may not otherwise have noticed. And this is, the H6. On it, it has 4 little of these switches, and they say pad. Pretty cool. I'm trying to come up with a joke for that, but there really isn't a good one. So pad is a 10 or 20 decibel reduction in the overall frequency, all the frequencies, in order to protect the internal electronics. So if you're recording gunfire or you're having to clap hands very close, the pad is an excellent way to make sure that you're not overloading something and hurting something. But if it's on and you're recording regular dialogue, you're going to have to turn this trim way the fat up to get it to sound like anything, and then you're just getting noise from the preamp. So make sure your pad is not on. Now, microphones also have pads, so you want to make sure that those are not engaged. But sometimes you just have a bad microphone, and that's a sad day. Oh, no. And a rare day if you've been taking care of your microphones, as we've been talking about, and will talk about throughout this course. But try a different microphone, and if it works, use it and put red tape on the other one, take it to the shop. Sometimes if you get low volumes, high volumes, the cable may be bad, and it may have shorts in it that are just perfectly aligned for a while, especially if people have been stepping on it like silly PAs, messing up your good cables. Replace the cable. They're not that expensive. Better than replacing a microphone, and see how you do. Lav transmitters and receivers have various sensitivities, and anything that's professional will have an output that you can change from the transmitter and an input that you can change from the receiver. And if you're not careful, you can easily overload the receiver or underload it depending on that coefficient. You want to make sure that your transmitter and your receiver have just the right kind of relationship so that you're not getting too much volume or too little. Obviously, too much volume is clipping, and you'll look at your recorder and say, hey, how come it's not clipping, but it sounds distorted, sounds like fried chicken? It's probably because your transmitter is overloading. Or you have to turn it way up and go, why is it so quiet? Well, probably because your transmitter isn't sending out a very loud signal and your receiver isn't being very sensitive. Switch those until you get them the way you like, and you'll be good. If you're hearing like a motorboating sound, like your microphone's going and it's not coming from anywhere in the actors or in the atmosphere, and so on, it just sounds like a motorboat. I'm sorry to say, you have a dead microphone. There's no way to fix it. You can take it to the shop, but they're going to tell you it's dead. You need to replace it. Sorry. Microphones aren't the only thing that have trouble on set. Sometimes the recorder malfunctions, just stops working, and we don't know why. Maybe it got too hot, maybe it got too cold, maybe you're recording on a laptop that doesn't have an SSD and has an actual spinning hard drive, and it got bumped while you were recording. That could be a real catastrophic failure. Sometimes you have the wrong inputs for your laptop. I'll tell you a story about, I was recording or shooting on a set, and our lead actor was doing some voiceover. We had a lav on him, we had a boom so we could get really good audio. We listened to it back and it sounded like he was in a toilet. We tried it again, same thing, like really reverby toilet sound. And I walked up to the sound recordist and we couldn't figure it out. And I said, is it possible that you're recording on the internal mics of the laptop? And he had this PC thing. And he's like, oh, no, that's not possible. And I was kind of a jerk. And I said, here, put on your headphones for a second. And he did. And I took my index finger and I went on the computer itself. And of course, the headphones leapt off his head. Sometimes it's a recording problem. Sometimes it's a recordist problem. Make sure you have the right inputs, especially if you're running on a PC where the drivers aren't necessarily easy to navigate, not well coded. So just be careful you've got the right inputs. Sometimes it's a recorder problem. Sometimes the reason you didn't get the data recorded on your recorder is not because it got, corrupted or something broke in the recorder. It's because you didn't hit record. And back in the old days, it was easy. We ran Nagras and the reels moved, and we knew it was in record because everybody knew they were going like this. And we knew, well, they weren't going like this. They were probably going like this, right? Otherwise, I don't know, that's probably going to go so well. Bad things happen then. But we knew. Bottom line, the crew's cracking me up. Bottom line is, now with modern recorders, it's a red light. And sometimes in the sun, you can't tell if the red light's in. How do you know? Hopefully you have a shield to, shade, but what are you going to do? So have a system down that's bulletproof. And when I say bulletproof, I mean you never deviate. You do this, then this, then this, and then record, and then that. And if you build yourself into a system where you have checks and balances and double checks and double balances, never to be overdrawn, then you'll always make sure that you're in record and never mess that up. And believe me, I've done it. It's the most embarrassing thing. If your audio is starting to sound like it's really crushed, not distorted, but just really loud and punchy, and things are going like this, and it sounds really loud and weird, not nice and dynamic and easy, it's probably because you've chosen to have your compressors on or your limiters on or both on your channels, on your recorder. And, I'm not telling you to do that. You can. It certainly protects you, but it also gives you a false sense of security, because if you go way over and your limiter and your compressor bring down the signal, it's just as useless as if you'd gone over, except that if you'd gone over, at least you can get fixed in RX. But if you crush it with limiting and compression, that's a big problem to try to get that dynamic range back. So double check that your inputs are nice and good. -10, give it the average for dialogue, and make sure you're not crushing your compressors or limiters. It'll give you a false sense of security and a really weird sound. When you're in the field, when you're on set, we're always listening on headphones, right? Obviously, because we don't want the sound that we're recording going out and making a mess. But if you listen to the sound you're recording at a low level, then you're going to miss a lot of the noise that's being picked up by the microphone, and it's going to show up in post, and your post-production supervisor is going to yell at you going, "Why didn't you hear that?" And your only answer is going to be, "I listened at a level that was too low." Now, I'm not saying you should listen really loud. I mean, I know guys that listen to stuff at 90, 95 decibels to make sure they don't, miss anything. Well, that's very noble, but no one can pay you enough to lose your hearing, right? So listen at 80, 85 dB at most, and listen on headphones that have a nice high frequency response. You might even, if you're daring, if you have a mixer that'll do this, turn up the master output high frequencies so that it gives you a little bit more understanding of what you're hearing, like the noise and things that are happening. But look, the problem with that is sometimes you get a false sense of high frequencies, and then you get the audio back and you're like, oh, everything's dark. Why is that? So just be mindful of your headphone listening level, just like you would in the mix when you're listening to your mix, which we'll talk about in the mix down section. Make sure it's 80, 85 decibels at most. Sometimes you'll get distortion, especially in PA situations where you're driving a lot of really powerful speakers, and all your inputs will be right and nothing's distorting. You've got your output sections right, nothing's going on there. Everything seems right, and you can't figure out where the distortion is coming from. Well, one of the places to check is the actual level of power. What is the voltage that you're running at? Because if it dips below 110 volts, in America at least, and the equivalent in overseas and you 50 hertz folks, then you're not going to have enough power to power the speakers. It's less so in recording on set because it doesn't take a lot of power to power headphones, but you can have a similar problem, especially in recording gear that's being powered by AC. If it goes below 104 volts, then you're going to start seeing corrupted files and all kinds of other problems like this, even overheating, which is, you'd think, well, that's weird. Why would low power create that? But it does. And you lose your gear. If you see voltage going below 109 volts, 108 volts, it's time to start really thinking about unplugging your gear and going to batteries if you can. Now, conversely, if it's going over 124 volts, you got a different problem. You're not going to have distortion, you're just going to have things blowing up in your face. And you're like, well, where would that ever happen? Well, you'd be surprised. We've been in some hotels where it was like we plugged in a voltmeter and we're like, are you kidding me? This is the reason why we can't run our 5.1 surround system for sound advice. So keep with yourself, a little voltage meter that you can plug into the wall. Don't use the butter knife that you used when you were a kid. It doesn't really work. Voltage meter, see what the voltage is like, and hopefully that isn't a problem. High temperature and low temperature. Real easy ways to kill things and make them not work. I was on a show out in a city called Ojai, up in sort of central California outside Los Angeles, and we were shooting all year round, and it got down to below freezing during the day in the winter and over 118 in the summer. And we were out there shooting with HVX 200s, for those of you who remember those venerable cameras. And we'd have a camera that you couldn't touch anymore, and it would start corrupting files. Strange. But if your cameras are getting overheated, there's a good reason for that. You have them in the sun. And just because the temperature outside is 118 doesn't mean that your black camera is the same. It's usually 30 degrees more, right? You're melting things inside it at worst. Your audio gear is exactly the same way. Same if it gets to freezing. You get below 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, you're looking for trouble, and you need to get some kind of a heating blanket, just like we do on the big Cine Alta lenses and all that other stuff. Put a heating blanket across your gear so that it doesn't underheat rather and get cold. The next worst thing, maybe actually the most worst thing you could do, is go from below freezing and then take it into a nice warm environment. Guess what you just did? Add condensation all throughout your gear. And we all know that water is the number one killer and the number one enemy of gear. So be very careful about your temperature, and hopefully you'll be all right. Corrupted files are a drag, man. Totally. You lose perfectly good takes that were great. It's embarrassing, it's frustrating. And the best way to solve that is make sure your cards and your media and your drives are formatted to the least volatile format. Something that is used to taking a beating. If it's a drive, you want something that's journaled so that if the drive falls apart or power gets cut out to it, the computer can restore it. If it's on a card, you want to make sure that it's at a format that more than one computer can use. Why is that? Well, because one computer may not be able to read it if it gets corrupted, but another one might. So don't take your chances. Files do get corrupted. Raise the odds of you having less of those, and if they do get corrupted, you'll be able to resurrect them. We actually had a situation on that very same shoot in Ojai where the camera got hot. We lost a perfectly good take because it was corrupted in this card. We took the card out, put it into one Macintosh, it wouldn't read it, put it into another Macintosh, and it did. So don't lose hope, but ideally you're not getting corrupted files. Format everything correctly.
Dynamic microphones are like the most indestructible force on the planet. In a nuclear war, there's going to be glass and dynamic microphones everywhere. You can't destroy them. Drop them in your beer, throw them around the stage, use them as a weapon for home defense. They're still going to be able to do good dialogue and good audio. But condenser microphones are the opposite. Very sensitive. And if you're banging around your condenser microphones or you don't have them in a nice cushioned case, those diaphragms could tear, puncture, all kinds of things. Those diaphragms are made out of basically cloth, very, very fine cloth. And they're at high tension so that they can match the resonant frequencies of their mounting and everything else. Anything untoward happens to them, you are in for a major repair. It's not going to work. And there's everybody going crazy because they're waiting on you because your microphone doesn't work. So please treat your dynamic microphones, but certainly your condensers and absolutely your ribbon microphones with the utmost of care, as if they were a brand new infant baby. You would not just jostle them around and say, "Here, come here, kid." You treat them with the gentlest of care, and those microphones will serve you well for a long time.
We talked about temperature, but let's talk about ice. And you're like, well, yeah, but if I'm above freezing, why would I ever have ice on my stuff? Well, you'd be surprised, especially if you happen to be over an air conditioning unit or near an air conditioning unit. You can put on a jacket, but your gear can't, and ice is deadly. Why? Not only does it
bring the core temperature of your gear down, it turns into what? Water. And water is the next thing that is the most dangerous thing. You hear me say it all over this entire course. Water will kill everything. You'll drown in it and it'll kill your gear. Keep water clear of your gear. So check it out. Back when I was in college, we had this beautiful sound workshop console, and there was a guy who thought it was cool to drink beer while he was working. I don't have a problem with drinking beer while you're working, but drinking beer while it's sitting on the console? Look, rule number one and only rule, no liquids near your gear. Let me say it again. No liquids near your gear, especially the ones with the little caps on that are supposed to not spill, because they always do. So listen, this guy was drinking his beer. Guess what happened? What do you think happened? He spilled it all over the console, put his hand across, all over the console. Now, fortunately, he had the brain to reach down and turn off the console, and it turned off. And when I got there, I was second engineering at the time. I was a kid. They're there with 3 blow dryers trying to blow this stuff out. That doesn't count for the fact that the smell of the beer, the stickiness of the beer. But listen, they got it dried, they turned it back on, and all was well, except for the beer smell that was there for a year. But no liquids near your gear.
Sometimes you just can't get the audio from your microphone into your recorder, and it's the most frustrating thing, especially knowing how much people hate waiting for audio and how crazy they go when you're on set, when they're waiting for something audio-wise to get fixed. And usually, like 99.98% of the time, it's not the physical microphone. Sometimes it is, but almost never. It's usually somewhere else in the chain. And I want to walk you through a couple of chains to hopefully give you some ideas as to where you can look to fix what might be keeping the audio from getting from your microphone into your recorder. And the first place to start is, in fact, with the recorder. And it really doesn't matter what kind of recorder you have. If you have condenser microphones on one end or the other, you need to have phantom power, plus 48 volts. Now, some recorders have plus 12 volts, plus 5, plus 3, plus 1 volts I've even seen. Well, for most condenser microphones, you need plus 48 volts. And if that isn't selected on your recorder, you're going to get nothing, no matter how good it's going. It's just not going to happen. Then the next thing you need to check is the actual fader trim, the preamp of the actual mic. You want to make sure that is not all the way down, right? You want to make sure that it's up and you're receiving signal. If you have the phantom power on, and the trim is up, then you're still not getting anything, then you need to look at the fader. Now, what does that mean? Well, on some recorders, like the F8, it has an input trim and a fader trim for output to headphones and other direct outputs. So if you have volume coming in on the trim and you see the LEDs moving, but you still can't hear anything, and you're sure your headphones are plugged into the right place, then that fader may be down. And you have to go through the menus to figure out how to get there to that right channel. And you'll see that fader's down and just bring it up, and you should be able to have your audio back in place. The next place to look if that's not working is solo or PFL. And on the F8, it's really easy to be able to hit a button and all of a sudden everything goes dead. Especially if you hit a PFL button on a channel that you don't have record armed, you get nothing. It's nowhere. And in fact, you won't even see any level trims happening sometimes. So make sure that the PFL or the solo lights are not on at all. Then after that, if that's not working, and you're sure the PFLs and the solos are all off, make sure it's armed. Make sure the track itself has the record arm light on if your recorder does that, or the input is, open or whatever. I mean, every recorder kind of has its own way of doing that now. But if you're expecting to record or hear audio on channel 1 should have a red light or a record arm that allows you to see it. And even though you've got phantom power on and all these other things, if it's not armed, chances are you're not going to see it. Now, like the F8, many recorders only send phantom power once it's armed. So, if you've got a condenser and you've got everything right, but it's not armed, even if you have phantom power selected, it's still not going to send phantom power, which, it's kind of a drag, but there you go. Then if you've got all that working, still nothing, check the master output levels. Sometimes, even though the faders of the individual channels are right, there's going to be a master section, which those faders may have been pulled down. Make sure those are up. Otherwise, you're kind of, you're again, sending things to the right place, but getting shut down at the very end. There are also settings for pre and post fader. Sometimes you've got things routed funny and you've got like, hey, this is going over here, but it's not actually going to the master fader. So make sure that your channels, the ones that you want to be recording on, are actually being routed to the master fader and going post fader, not pre-fader. We don't want to have things going before we have the chance to deal with them with an EQ or with low cut filter or anything else. Also, let me just say this about the phantom power voltage. Most recorders only do plus 48. If you do have a recorder that'll do plus 5 or plus 12, and you don't have a microphone that wants to see that, if you send the wrong voltage, even though it's a lower voltage, to a microphone that expects to see 48, you can damage it. So my advice, be really sure that the microphones that you have plugged in are not 48. Ironically, you probably won't hurt a plus 5 microphone that you send 48 volts to, but you can hurt a plus 48 microphone that you send less than. It's like sort of like a rolling brownout or whatever. It's kind of a drag. So good thing is most microphones are 48. Lastly, if nothing is coming out and you just can't, like even in headphones, and you're like, man, I still don't hear anything. Well, on the recorder level at least, do a factory reset. And on the Zoom, that pretty much sets this thing back to you plug it in and you can hear something. Sometimes things get messed up. It's software after all. And especially if you've done a new firmware update, or even if you haven't used it in a while, there are batteries that keep memory of settings and things like this, and they can get corrupted. Hitting factory reset kills all of that, puts it back to, yay, it works, and you should be good to go. If this doesn't work, then we need to look outside of the recorder to something a little more systemic to the microphone, cables, and other things to be considered, whether wireless or wired. Let's check it out. Once you determine that the recorder isn't the issue, even if you have to factory reset it, then and only then can you say, hey, this might be a straight hardware issue. And it may be something as simple as the input on your recorder has gone bad, and that's happened for sure. So that's a simple thing. Just take the microphone and plug it into a different input and see if you get anything better. If not, then, especially if you plugged it into multiple inputs, and you're like, I'm still getting nothing no matter what I do, then you want to replace your cable. Try a different cable, because the cables are your enemy and they get mistreated and misused, and usually the cable is the bad thing in the chain once you get out of a recorder. Once you determine that the cable is definitely not the issue by using a bunch of cables, there might be settings on the microphone itself that are keeping you from being able to have it heard. None of the least of which is on-off. Like on this TM7, it's definitely got an on feature and an off feature. It also has battery power, but if you don't have this on, and by on I mean it's lit either blue or green, you're gonna get nothing. Same is true on the 10 dB pad, although 10 dB really doesn't do much. I mean, it reduces it a little bit. You should still be able to hear it. But sometimes that pad can reduce it enough to make you believe, especially if you're in a noisy environment with headphones, that I'm not hearing anything. So make sure the pad is off, but the on button is on. If that's not the case, then you need to be checking for actual damage to the microphone. And by the time you've gotten here, this is a very rare occurrence. I mean, unless you've run it over with a truck or dropped the condenser microphone in the water or something worse. You typically know that there's a problem with the microphone because you don't hear nothing. You hear something, but it sort of sounds like one of two things. Either an eerie high pitch, like this, or it's a motorboating sound, like that kind of thing. If you hear the eerie high pitch, then it's likely that the digital components or the electronic component of the microphone has been damaged and you have to have it replaced. If you hear the motorboating sound, that means the microphone is dead. You need to bury it. That means the physical part, the actual driver and everything else, the diaphragm may even be damaged, and it's going to need either a complete replacement or a complete overhaul. But since we're not trying to figure out what's wrong, we only want to figure out how to get it working. The best solution in this case, if you've plugged it in and it's still not working and you've checked to make sure the settings on the mic are okay, replace the mic as fast as possible. Get up and running. Wireless is much the same as wired for tracking down problems. We still have to have a working recorder. And once we have that, then we have to make sure the inputs to the recorder are still working. Once you've plugged in the microphone to multiple recorder inputs, then we try the cable that goes from the recorder to the receiver. And they're usually very small little dinky cables like this, and not usually shielded, and are usually fall prey to all kinds of bad things that happen. So replace that. If that's not working, then you want to make sure that the settings in your receiver are correct. Sometimes there's internal mutes or all kinds of other things that happen. Make sure that the settings there are right. If that is not working, try a different receiver. Obviously, make sure it's on the same channel as your transmitter. Sometimes receivers go bad and things like this. If that's not working, I would have said try the batteries, right? But usually you would have been able to see that the batteries are, going bad. It's very, very rare that a receiver goes bad while the batteries are still good. You know what I mean? Because these are really robust things. I mean, unless you buy something that's super, super cheap. But generally, these rarely go bad. As long as the batteries are strong and the settings are right, you're usually in good shape. So we talked about checking the frequency. Sure, you want to check the frequency on the receiver, but you also want to check the frequency on the transmitter. Obviously, they both have to be the same. On most devices, you can check to see, hey, am I getting it? If you're not getting the signal from the transmitter, and if you have LEDs or some kind of notation to see that you're getting signal, then that's an issue. You might try the input of your receiver. And if your input, if you have that kind of a setting, is way too low, it may seem like you're not getting anything, but you really are. It's just very low, and you can change the input sensitivity of your receiver. If that's not working and it's just not even coming to the receiver, then obviously check the batteries on the transmitter side, check the mute button. That's usually the culprit, that you had the mute button on. And some of these transmitters, it's very easy to accidentally hit the mute button, and sometimes it's very difficult to see that it's on mute. I know here on these Saramonic UW Mic 9s, the red light comes on both here on the transmitter and on the receiver, and you can say, oh, well, that's clearly on a mute button, and we're never going to hear anything no matter how good it is. If that's not working, then you need to check your squelch. Now, some of you have older transmission devices, and if you're using a Sennheiser C-band, please stop using it immediately because it's illegal. But if your squelch is set wrong, or if it's set on all the time, or the sensitivity is weird, you're not going to be able to hear anything because it's getting interference channels, and instead of giving you just, it's just going to mute everything. Which also begs the question, did you do a free frequency scan before you started your session? If you didn't, you may be jumping or merging with other bands that have a more powerful signal than yours, and that squelch will come in and just mute everything until you change channels to a more free and clear frequency. So try that. You might just move the frequency of the transmitter, move the frequency of the receiver, and theoretically it'll start working, and you'll know because it'll show up on the receiver. If that doesn't work, change channels just generally. These don't have a specific frequency that you can change. You can actually change between 1 and 96 just stock channels. That's the bandwidth that they're allowed. So my advice is always push your wireless channels as high as you can go. So I wouldn't start with this on channel 1. I'd start with this on channel 96 and then move down, 95, 94, 93. I like to put channels in between so that I got more bandwidth. It's probably unnecessary, but I'm just kind of that way. I want to have more buffer I never want to have RF hits. I hate RF hits. But in this case, we're talking about no audio at all. So start at channel 96 or start at the highest level of megahertz you can get, and then move down from there, hopefully not running into any bad channels. If you've been through all of that and it's still not working, sometimes the transmitter setting itself might be not sensitive enough, and you might need to turn up the input volume for the transmitter. I mean, some systems actually only have the ability to turn up the sensitivity of the mic from the transmitter, not on the receiver. And you got to balance that so you have a good volume equality between transmitter and receiver. And again, if you're in a noisy environment, you're trying to listen and I don't hear anything, it might be there, it just might be very, very low, and maybe even lower than your LEDs will register just because your settings are wrong there. And if that's not working and you have any adapters or cables or anything that's not like from the microphone to the transmitter or from the receiver to the mixer, change those out immediately. And sometimes, especially with Rode products where you have to absolutely have Rode cables, if you don't have a Rode cable, you're going to get nothing, which I think is kind of lame, but that's just how it is. If you don't have a Rode cable, you're not going to hear anything. With every other transmitter or every other kind of thing, any cable will work. But again, if you have adapters, change those out as soon as you can, or plug in your headphone directly to the transmitter if it has that capability like this one does, and listen to make sure that it's working. If that's not working, it might be the microphone itself to the transmitter. Again, it may not be the microphone that's damaged, but those little weaselly, unshielded cables are so susceptible to damage because they always get yanked and all kinds of things. And what makes it worse is that now modern transmitters make you screw them in so that if this is attached and something gets pulled, it gets yanked on, wham, bam, bam, just like I did to my lavalier. And all of a sudden, you've got a broken cable. Microphone's fine, but because it's hardwired to the cable, hardwired to the microphone, you got to get yourself a new microphone, right? It's not really even worth it unless it's a Sheps or something like this. It's not even worth it to get it fixed. So try a different microphone, plug in a different one. If that works, I'm sorry to say you have a bad microphone. If that doesn't work, change transmitters. Your transmitter might be bad. Again, like the receivers, it's incredibly unlikely that you're going to get a bad transmitter unless the batteries are bad, or maybe the batteries have acidized in the transmitter, and then you are getting a new transmitter. And if none of this has worked, and you're like, Mark, I did everything you told me to do, and it's still not working. It's crazy. It's not working. And you've plugged it into the wall and turned it on. It's alien Zulu stuff, and it's beyond my religion's ability to fix it for you. Well, let's talk about cables. Cables are integrated into almost everything we do, even from a wireless standpoint. We have to deal with cables, right? I'm wearing a lav now, and from the microphone to the transmitter is a cable. In the transmitter are cables, and some of you are like, well, yeah, I use wireless. I don't have to deal with cables at all. Well, yeah, you do. And if you're not treating your cables well, you've got problems. You should really treat your cables like they're your arteries. Now I know some of you go to McDonald's and eat the double doubles and the Burger King and double, that's In-N-Out. You know what I'm talking about. Double fries, supersize me, and then Diet Coke. Don't tell me Diet Coke is good for you, because it's not. It's bad for you. And it treats your arteries badly. And some of you take your cables and stretch them and step on them with boots and, do horrible things to your cables as if it doesn't matter. Well, this is the only thing that's keeping you from bad sound. Because if this is bad, you're going to get bad sound no matter how good it is. Well, why is that? Well, every cable degrades your signal. What? How can that be? Well, it's the nature of physics. If I put audio in here, and this is a splitter, and even if it wasn't a splitter, if it comes out here, it's going to be degraded. And I can prove it to you. Because just imagine if I'm here in Los Angeles and I want to send 10,000 volts to you in Tampa, Florida. Well, are you going to get 10,000 volts if I don't use some kind of crazy device between here and there? No, it's going to be degraded. And it's the same thing here, obviously to a much, much lesser degree, but nonetheless there. And if you've got a system that's using 100 cables, you've just amplified and multiplied your cable problems by 100. And that includes line noise and lowered volumes. And if you've got bad cables, you can have shorts and all kinds of RF interference. And, again, every cable is a liability. And that's why I think cables really are our enemies. And until we can figure out how to truly wirelessly beam the energy of voltage in these cables to some other receiver, we are stuck with them, and we should treat them like our arteries. It's one of the reasons why I should say you should keep your enemies close and your cables closer. And some of you were like, well, it's no big deal, Mark, because I use a completely digital system. It's all fiber optic or BNC or TDIF or one of these, ADAT wireless. Look, with digital, it's even more important, because if you lose a little bit down this cable or a bunch of bits, it doesn't take much, your entire system will go down, because in a digital transmission across a cable, there's very, very little error correction. Now, wirelessly, there's tons of it. But in a cable, no, they expect every bit that came here is going to come out here. And if you've abused your cables, that's not going to happen, and you're going to have massive problems. You're going to be finding yourself going through all the cables that you abuse, hoping that one can work, while everybody's going crazy because they're waiting for you on set. So how do these cables terminate? What kind of adapters do we put on them? Well, you're all very well familiar with XLR cables or Canon cables. They're little roundy looking things with three little spikes in them. One's for positive, one's for negative, one's for ground. And the reason that we do that, we split the signal into positive, going down one little teeny cable inside the bigger cable, and negative doing the same thing on a separate cable, because of a theory, and I mean theory, that if we do that and we split them up, that EM or RF interference might not degrade the signal as much. I highlight that it is a theory. Nevertheless, that is XLR canon. Shielded exists because of the theory that if we run a little metal sheath down the length of the cable, it will block EM and RF frequencies. Again, it's a theory, but you can't run unbalanced, unshielded cables longer than 10 feet, or you're going to pick up a radio station or some nonsense and it won't work. So shielded cables, much better. I don't want to run shielded, unbalanced cables longer than 10 feet either. So wherever you can do it, it's not always possible, of course, but get balanced and shielded connections. 1/4 inch or phono cables, you're really familiar with. The guitar cable comes in a couple of varieties: TS, tip sleeve, or TRS, tip ring sleeve. Now, tip ring sleeve is what we call a balanced connector. And what that means is there is a positive, a negative, and a ground, the tip and the ring and the sleeve. Now, that's the same as XLR. That is a balanced connector. But phono cables, or 1/4 inch, can also be unbalanced stereo. That means that you can have the left, the right, and the ground, and it's unbalanced. Now, the TS, the tip sleeve, is always an unbalanced mono cable. Then there is 1/8 inch or 3.5 millimeter. Same thing as the 1/4 inch, just a smaller variety. You're very familiar with it in consumer grade headphones and that kind of thing. Tip ring sleeve, usually used, and you're all very familiar with it, as headphones or whatever, stereo unbalanced connector. But it can be used as a balanced mono connector, but almost never is. Then there's also TRRS, tip ring sleeve, and that's what you see on your phones. That extra little ring is for the microphone on your headphones that's there being sent back to the phone itself. So 2 coming out of the phone to the headphones and 1 going back to the phone. RCA cables are the little things that look kind of like a flower with a big spike in the middle, or it can be just a round sheath around the outside and a spike in the middle. That's a mono unbalanced cable. We use them in all kinds of things, from video to just any number of consumer grade things. But for professional purposes, we actually use digital down those cables. So everything that I've talked about so far is analog, actual voltage, transduced from, whatever. What we're going to talk about now is digital cables, RCA being the first. And we use SPDIF or all kinds of other things, but SPDIF would be the one that you'd be most familiar with, a digital signal that goes down the RCA cable. BNC, or SDI for you video folk, is a balanced digital connector. Of course, you can run analog stuff down it if you want, but primarily it's used for digital. And we use BNC on the audio world for clock and word clock and all kinds of synchronization. Optical or TOS link, TOS link, is the consumer grade, basically fiber optic laser that sends audio digital information from one end to the other, usually 2 channels, 48K, 96K at 24-bit. It's not to be confused with ADAT optical, which looks exactly the same. It's exactly the same kind of cable, but instead of 2 channels, it has 8 channels. Now, ADAT, A-D-A-T, all caps, is basically a recorder that we used to use way back, and it actually ran on Super VHS tape. It was like a venerable, awesome thing. But probably the best thing that ever did was create the ADAT fiber optic link. So check it out though. If you plug a TOS link output to an ADAT input, or vice versa, you're going to get an earful of digital harshness. And if you think that you're like, oh look, I've got a little optical port on my computer, that's not ADAT. I promise you it's not ADAT, especially if you have a PC. It's not. Especially if you have a Mac, especially if you have a computer. Look, ADAT is a special thing that's usually on breakout boxes, and if you think, oh, I'm going to get 8 channels out of it, that's a special breakout thing. So it's usually TOS link, you get 2 channels, go with that. There are certain cables that are proprietary to various gear. You know, we used to use ADATs, for those of you who remember that multi-track system on Super VHS. Yeah, so cool. And they had their own fiber optic. It's like you put a little laser on the thing and it comes out and goes to another device. It would do 8 tracks at 48 kilohertz. I think it even did 24-bit, 96 kilohertz, 8 tracks. We still use it all the time, but it is a proprietary format, and it even says that on there. Where it gets tricky is where something doesn't look proprietary and shouldn't be proprietary, but is. And this is where Rode microphones comes in. I have never, I'm using the word never, been able to use a Rode device without using a Rode cable. And I think that kind of sucks, but that's how it is. Now XLR, you know, a straight XLR is fine. But if you're using any of their little piggly tail 3.5 millimeter TRS jacks or any of those other things, certainly Micon cables, you have to have a Rode version of that cable. You can't just go to Radio Shack and get your own 3.5 millimeter TRS cable and plug it in. Now, some of you have said on Cinema Sound that you've been able to do that, but most of us have not. And you get this weird low level whine plus a low level signal coming out of it. And you're like, why is this so awful? Well, that's because you need to have Rode connectors and Rode adapters. Even if you're going to XLR from TRS 3.5 millimeter, for those of you who are using filmmaker kits and things like that, you need to have those Rode adapters and Rode cables. So it's no surprise or secret that I hate cables. And we got to do whatever we can to make using cables as simple and efficient as possible. And one of the things I've discovered with little cables, like little wall wart cables or even kind of medium-sized, like larger 1/4 inch or XLR cables, is a special little thing that you can do around your, you know, rock-on fingers, just like this. And what it allows you to do is do a little wrap, keep everything nice and neat, and then immediately things come out completely untangled. I also use it for my little headphones for my phone and things like that. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So what you do is that you take your little wall wart thing here, this bit, and you put it down on the floor or somewhere on the table, being careful with it. And then we take this end or whatever. And you don't have to have a wall wart, it can be on any cable. And then you make the cool sign like this, and you take this and you hold it just here. So you're gonna, between your thumb and your forefinger, you make this sign, and then we're gonna drag this around and then make a little figure 8, like this. So you're making little figure 8s just like you would do on whatever those things are called on a ship, you know, where they dock it on the dock or whatever. Now you gotta keep it tight. Don't let your fingers come in. You wanna keep this kind of tight and wrapping it around your fingers real good. Not too tight, because you're ultimately gonna be pulling this off, but the weight of this actually is more than enough to keep that tension going. And we just wrap it around, figuring 8, and we come to about this place here. You can do that, but it's a little bizarre. When you get here, then what you do is with your right hand, we grab it right here in the middle, the little X that we've made, so to speak. And we grab it with our thumb and forefinger, and we just pull it off, holding it in this so that it's like this. Then we're gonna take this part here, and we're gonna wrap it around the middle, like this. 1, 2, 3, however long you can, however many times you need, until you can take this and put it through the middle of one of these loops. You want to capture all of the loops that you can and then pull it tight. Now you've got this whole thing here, which is super easy. It's not going to get more tangled or anything like this, right? And that's nice. It's a nice way to keep cables. Then to get rid of it, if you want to open it back up, all you do is take this back out of the little loops and... Now, since cables should also be treated like your arteries, we want to know how to roll them for storage, for easy use, and all these other kinds of things. There's a bunch of ways of rolling cables that are fine, and there's a bunch more that are not fine. And I've got here just a little handy-dandy XLR cable. What you must never do is this nonsense. This is nonsense, and I don't care. You can write me hate letters if you think this is how you should do it. You never roll a cable that way. There's a bunch of reasons why. One, cable, because of the nature of how it is, any cable has a memory to it. And if you're gonna store it in such a way that it's at high tension by wrapping it around your arm like this, Watch what happens. I'm just going to show you. This just hurts me doing this to this poor little XLR cable. And when I'm done with this, watch what happens. It's going to twist. It's going to do all kinds of weird things. Now, actually, this cable's been reasonably well taken care of. Its memory goes, I tell you what, I want to be like this. But any other cable, it's going to wrap around and cause high tension. Now, if you want to do it to your, weed whacker extension cable out for your yard, I really don't care. But eventually what happens is they twist into a figure 8 and you have fun with that. My suggestion, there's a way to do inside and outside and all that. You can do that if you want to figure that out, that's fine. Here's what I suggest. Hold it lightly in your hand like this. Take a loop of it, however long you want it to be, and just roll it across lightly so that the weight of it is still just kind of holding itself. No pulling or yanking on it like this. When you do this, you want to twist it slightly with your fingers. And I mean slightly, like maybe a quarter turn. And then we do it again and again. Just slightly, I'm doing with my thumb and forefinger again. Trying to get these together. It's very hard to do this while you look at camera, by the way. I don't recommend it. Now, see how this has kind of a bend sort of in it? I might need to give it another loop or just find out what's wrong with this cable loop here. Well, let's see what happens with this. There we go. And you want to take a look at the cable while you're doing this. Ideally, you end up with both ends here, not an end down here like this. It kind of doesn't matter if you do. And then, you probably can't see this. This is a silly little plastic twist tie thing. You can use Velcro, you can use zip ties, whatever you want, but it's not usually a good long-term idea to do one of these things, where you're wrapping it around and then, connect it together like this. And the reason for this is, again, you're putting high tension on this cable. And if you're gonna sit there and leave it on a shelf or wherever for even a day, when we let go of this, let's see what happens. Even for a few seconds, it retains that memory. And if we do it over and over and over again, you're gonna have this weird little thing in your cable that over time will end up fracturing the little bits in this cable. Not niggly bits, just little bits. So let me try this again. Of course, I've wrapped this all the way around, which is what I just said not to do. Ideally, when you've wrapped it right, you let it go, it doesn't tangle. It'll just sit on the floor and you can pull this up. So we're gonna go like this, little twist, little twist, little twist. And I had to flip that over because it was wire, it's been, I twisted it when I was demoing that, and that's why this is not a good idea to do. To wrap that around and around it at the end and connect cables, connect the connectors. Here. And you get these kinds of things sometimes where it's, hyper twisted like this or something like that. Don't pull on it like this. That's always the wrong thing to do. Untwist it. And now, very nicely, becomes this cool thing here. Good. Now you see I got this weird one. If I were a perfectionist, and I am, I'd do it again. Because this is just so much fun. And I know you're so enthralled by this. For long-term storage, you want your cables to be in great position. No stress on them. There we go. Got my things that are here. They're called adapters, Mark. That's good. Terminations. And then I just do a little twist. Now this cable is under no stress. The stuff inside, whether it's insulation or the actual wiring in here, is under very, very little stress. And I can actually put this on a tack if I want or a nail and pick it up 5 years from now and it's still gonna work just fine. Bottom line, don't torque your cables. Don't twist them, don't have them in high stress. Obviously you don't walk them in them or anything like that, but any way you wanna do it is up to you. This is just how I do it. But keep it light, keep everything loose, and then when you stack them, you can stack them freely as long as you have a twist tie on them. Now, if you think for 1 minute that you can stack a bunch of loose cables, even if you roll them perfectly and then have them all come out nice, it's Murphy's Law, because what can happen, and I'm gonna say must happen, will happen with cables. They just somehow, like snakes, want to just come together and mess with each other. So put twist ties on them, and you'll be in good shape.
Look, people are going to go crazy when your gear's not working on set. They're crazy for working on set at all, and maybe so are you for being an independent media creation. But at least now you've got some practical solutions for even preempting any of your gear going bad before you get to set. And while you're on set, you can quickly suss things out. You also learned how much of an enemy your cables are and to treat them like your arties. I'm telling you, cables are the things that will mess you up the fastest and the most often. So remember to keep your enemies close, but your cables closer.